so much for joining us. We've probably all experienced flight delays. Now the new airport is sitting on the tarmac. Its takeoff pushed back until fall. We'll look at what's going up and what's going down along the runways. Another form of transportation, party buses, may have their wings clipped by the Cantrell administration. And some numbers are emerging about the revenue actually generated by traffic cameras. The legislature convened this week. We will look at the governor and his speech to lawmakers, as well as the outlook for the session. And in the wake of a double stabbing incident on Canal Street by a person alleged to have mental problems, we'll discuss the state's efforts to deal with mental health. On board for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Tyler Bridges, reporter, The New Orleans Advocate; Catherine Sayer, reporter, NOLA.com, The Times-Picayune; and Kevin Litton, reporter, NOLA.com, The Times-Picayune. And we're going to go over to Errol first to talk about that airport, which we thought was going to be opening next month, and that was delayed from 2 previous times, and now it's going to be later.
It was supposed to open May 15th, and the announcement came out yesterday, and then the mayor was quoted saying, "We're just not ready yet," and other people involved with the project said the same thing. We just don't want to open it yet. You know what it reminded me of is in 1995 when Denver opened this new airport, Denver International, and there was much ballyhoo. It was supposed to be a modern, state-of-the-art airport, and they talked about this luggage system, this underground luggage system it was supposed to have, and it opened and it didn't work. And all you heard about was, despite all I did for the new airport was that the Denver airport wasn't ready to open yet. Mm-hmm. And once you do that, that reputation stays with you forever. People probably think of the Denver airport, well, the luggage here doesn't work. And so it's probably best to get all these things worked out, because nobody's going to remember that it opened late, but they will remember if there's a big problem. And kind of like reading between the lines, I think one thing they're really concerned about is the whole passenger interaction, the transportation of passengers into the airport, them getting there. They even talk about how they want to have actually some test runs of people getting to the airport. They're looking for volunteers that actually do that. And it's a big lot of, there's new terminals, there's new ways of accessing the airport. And so it's going to be very confusing. I think that's one thing that probably worries people more than anything else, the actual getting there.
And actually one benefit of the latest delay, and there have been several, is that the new terminal, which will be on the north side of the airfield, is going to be accessed via Loyola Drive off of I-10. And that's just a surface street right now. They're trying to get it up a little bit better in the meantime, but the flyover, the one that similar to the one that people take today to get to the current terminal, well, they want to build a new flyover, but that's not going to happen for several years. So this actually reduces a little bit the amount of time until that people will have to drive on the surface streets until that flyover is ready.
So, there's actually one route, I was driving that yesterday, that one access takes you into St. Charles Parish, and you go around, and I guess you access Airline Highway, and you hook around. So, yeah, it's gonna, a lot of people are going to be annoyed with it, and until they get it figured out. The big thing that they're selling, though, is that once you're in there, there's going to be one big common check-in place where you go through all the security, so there's not a lot of different gates. Then after that, you got this sort of like fantasy land with all the vendors, and all those will be together, and then you go into the new gates. So you say, once you're in there and once you go through the security, it's going to really be a good experience.
And I understand one reason why it is delayed again is because they're still trying to address vendor issues, where some vendors wanted larger kitchens than what they anticipated or something. And then also there were some issues, I believe, with baggage claim also, some technical issues that they had to work out. So
it's a big deal. It's going to cost, with the new roadway, about $1.3 billion, right. And that will mostly be paid for by passengers and the airlines. Won't be paid for, this money won't come out of the city's coffers. And as I said, the traffic, will probably be a big issue. But as Errol said, the projection is it's going to be a much nicer place to land to and fly out of. I should also mention, though, if you want to rent a car, the new terminals on the north side again of the airfield, and the Now you can just walk to the rental car facility. You're going to have to take a shuttle bus to come all the way back around to the south side after the new terminal opens.
Right, but in terms of the new terminal itself, there will be more amenities than what we have right now in our present airport. And you noted that it's going to be over $1 billion. Well, the original price tag was what?
$650 million.
So it's gone up a little bit.
It's gone up a lot, and I think it's worth remembering that the primary person who should get the credit or the blame for this is Mitch Landrieu. He was the guy who really conceived this idea back in 2013 and hoped to have it opened just as he was leaving office.
But the one thing I worry
ago.
about the amenities is that most passengers who use the airport are either going or leaving. They're not changing planes. And the places that the people that use all those amenities are at the big airports, the hub airports, where you're changing planes, where you got that 2 or 3 hour delay. And there's not that much of that kind of activity. It's what's called an origin and destination airport. Either you go into New Orleans, you come to New Orleans, you're not going somewhere else. And so you're wondering about the vendors, if they're going to have the same success that they have at other places.
Well, one thing about the airport, sorry, jump in if I can, that traffic has gone up enormously in recent years. And in fact, one of the delays is because they added some more gates.
Well, just to add, I just flew through the Austin airport, and that's not much of a hub, but that's a really cool airport that is all Austin, local vendors. They've got live music, similar to what I think they're going to try to get here in New Orleans. So it feels more like a branding.
Yeah.
It's probably like a Southwest mini hub, I would think, yeah.
Okay, so fall of 2019, now the target date for our new airport. Okay, we'll see.
Time for the Saint season.
That's right. All righty. Thanks, Lottie. Tyler, over to you. Excuse me. Legislature in session. This week it started, and the governor opened up the session. And so, what did the governor have to say?
Yeah, he gave what I think is basically his campaign speech. In this case, he gave it to all 144 legislators, and whoever was watching it at home talked about the things that he sees as his accomplishments, the things that he has been talking about, will continue to talk about for the rest of the campaign season.
And so some of those things are. What did he
certainly
tout?
at the top of the list is the expansion of Medicaid,
Right.
which benefits 480,000 working poor. He talked about something that he very much wants to achieve this legislative session, which is the pay raise for teachers and school support personnel.
Also, he noted in the speech that he was not going to be talking about a fiscal cliff, which is something that's really taken up his time in the early years of his time as governor.
Right, that was solved last year when he and the legislature renewed 0.45% of the 1 cent sales tax that had been imposed in 2016 to deal with the budget problems inherited from Bobby Jindal. And the taxes will not be a big issue this legislative session, but the budget issue was on Tuesday, something called the Revenue Estimating Conference. Kevin will remember this from his days of covering it in Baton Rouge. It's a 4-member body that has to agree on how much money the state now has extra money to spend. And a break with precedent, the House Speaker Taylor Barra 4 times had rejected the advice of the professional economists, 3 of them in fact, on how much revenue was now available. And that that meant that the governor, at least at that point, and the legislature could not approve the teacher pay raise. And finally, on Tuesday, Speaker Barra relented. It's not clear what changed his mind, and that has led to speculation he was playing politics. But now that money is now recognized by the Revenue Estimating Conference, and that means that it looks like there's no barriers to teachers getting the $1,000 pay raise for the first time in 10 years.
I guess the numbers got a little bit more clear for him, huh?
Well, yeah, he is a banker, so.
I was going to be really interested in seeing if messaging from Republicans changes around Medicaid expansion this year. I mean, there's been some that have been really, Medicaid work requirements and this kind of thing. But I saw some polling numbers that shows that it's really gotten more popular among Republicans now, and they'll be up for re-election this year. It's something I thought would be interesting to keep an eye on.
Yeah, it does seem that this is an issue that the governor is going to campaign heavily on. You look at the success of Democrats nationally in the 2018 elections, and I got to say, I think the governor had a pretty good week. He got good marks for his initial speech on Monday. Then the Revenue Estimating Conference on Tuesday recognized the extra money that will allow for the teacher pay raises, and then on Thursday he had his first campaign forum with another candidate. Ralph Abraham, the congressman from Northeast Louisiana, was there. The other Republican candidate, Eddie Risponi, did not attend the event. And the governor seemed a little tentative at first. And I'm reminded of how he was a quarterback in high school, and how he used to tell me that, you know, the game would start for him with that first hit. And at a certain point, he popped Abraham a couple of times in ways that sort of surprised me. And I think for him, the campaign forum Thursday at the Public Affairs Research Council was a chance for him to sort of get his first taste of the governor's race directly with another candidate.
Okay, so the beginning of the legislative session and the beginning of a campaign season for the governor. Huh?
Yeah, sort of the direct head-to-head. We really saw that for the first time at that forum on Thursday.
All right, thanks a lot, Tyler. All righty, let's go on over now to Kevin. And let me put my glasses on here so I can read what I wrote. We're doing the traffic cameras right now.
Yes.
And so traffic cameras, that, you know, a little bit of controversy on that because the traffic cameras now in school zones, and we found out just recently that the threshold was lowered. That's how fast you can go over, now up to what? I hear anywhere between 22 and 24.
So it used to be that you could go 6 miles over the limit in a 20-mile-per-hour school zone, and now they're enforcing it at 24 and 25 miles an hour.
And what kind of money is that bringing in?
So the numbers that came out this week, was about $7.2 million. So that's about a third of the $20 million that they collected last year. So a lot of this, you'll remember, goes back to the mayor making a campaign promise that she was going to take down traffic cameras. And so they were going to lose some revenue because they did decide to take down 20 of 31. And then they also are going to turn off the traffic cameras in the school zones during non-school hours. So it has really become clear now that the administration was planning for some way to replace some of that revenue without really telling city council during budget negotiations.
Or the public, right?
Well, the public too, but the analysis and the timing of them looking at how much money this would generate was in December, which is also when the budget passed. So council members caught off guard, the public obviously caught off guard, and then we also found that there was actually some information that was provided to the mayor's communications team to include in a press release in January when they notified everybody that they were taking down the traffic cameras, that they would actually be changing the limits on those traffic cameras at the enforcement thresholds. So then it becomes clear, it's like, well, you knew in January when you announced it, why didn't you announce it then? And their answer was, well, it wasn't going to take effect until February. But then they didn't tell anybody in February either. So then it really starts feeding into this narrative that you're kind of hiding something. And they were very slow to react in terms of just acknowledging that the thresholds had been changed. And so council members start reacting to that, and now we've got a meeting scheduled for next Thursday where council is going to be grilling the administration on how did this roll out? Why didn't you guys bring it up to us? I mean, the council does have a point, like they should have a full revenue picture that includes that $7.3 million when they approve the budget, and that didn't happen.
You know, Kevin, you deserve credit for breaking that story. I've got to ask you, given everything you just said, I've heard the mayor say on more than one occasion how important transparency is for her. How does that claim square with what you were able to report in the fallout of all that?
Well, it was a team effort. My colleague Will Nobles also helped report that story. So I think the transparency issue is starting to become a bigger one. I mean, there was that question around her trip to Cuba, which was the week before. Then the camera thing comes out sort of right in the middle of her Cuba trip. And now council members, I think, you're going to see those questions asked a little bit more pointedly when they come out Thursday, because there's been some things behind the scenes that have been happening that council members have been pretty careful on, because you need the mayor on your side to get stuff done in your district, right? But if they're not being told and they're not being filled in on things and they're caught by surprise, you know, that starts to wear a little thin with them. So I would expect that there's going to be a lot more talk about why haven't you told us and what else is there that you haven't told us.
So the $7.3 million amount, is that more than what was anticipated?
Well, we don't, more than
really
what was
know.
anticipated.
But for the revenue coming in from the cameras, with the cameras just now being in school zones, is that a little bit more? Or?
I'm not really clear on that because they didn't include that in the full analysis.
But basically, that's what we know has come in so far, and that was for 2 months?
Yeah, well, no, that's a projection for the entire year.
Oh, for the entire year.
Yeah.
Okay, I misunderstood that.
Yeah, they already did have a meeting where they were talking about the numbers, and the numbers had jumped, and the council members were asking why, and then they had an opportunity to say it then, and it wasn't said then.
Okay.
So I think like one of the things that just gets really interesting about this is just how much was that revenue important to you? Because when you approved the budget, you acted like it wasn't going to be a big deal. They said, oh, well, we have this money, we have increased sales taxes. We're doing really well. The revenue picture is looking better. So we're going to be fine when the cameras are shut off. Well, it turns out, no, they weren't going to be fine. They needed to find another way to raise the
And
money.
before they had raised how much when all of the cameras were operating? How much?
It was
before?
20 million, about 20
so it's a
million a
difference.
year.
Okay. All right, Kevin, thanks a lot. I'm going to go over to Catherine right now. And last week there was an incident where two people dropping off their children, two different parents, were assaulted and stabbed. One woman critically, she was hospitalized by another woman who was found to have mental health issues and actually now has been placed in a state hospital, and something that her family had been really asking to be the case. They knew this lady needed help. So that just leads us to the question of what is the state of mental health care in this state, public mental health care?
Well, I think it's important to begin this conversation by saying that the vast majority of people who have mental illnesses are not violent and, in fact, are more likely to be the victims of crime. And, I try to avoid promoting, unfair stereotypes or, continuing the stigma that's around mental illness. But certainly we have someone who's been committed after this kind of attack and had previous interactions with police. And so it, does lay bare the fact that we are severely lacking in outpatient mental health treatment. And it just shows that the criminal justice system is not set up to treat people with mental illnesses, but in a sense, that's the system that we have. And the victim in this case, the woman that you mentioned who was severely hurt, she came out, she issued a statement to the media saying, I think the lack of mental health resources contributed to this.
So you did a piece about the state hospital in Jackson, and to read the piece, it's just really depressing, because it seems like the facility is in dire need of upgrade and that more beds are really desperately needed.
Yes, that is a very fascinating place. The State Department of Health did provide me with a tour of the facility. It is very run down. The state, in their own assessment, is saying it's quickly deteriorating and becoming unsafe for patients. Now, they made that statement as part of their request for $348 million in capital outlay to build a new forensic hospital. It seems highly unlikely that they would get that amount of funding, but there are 640 patients there, nearly all of whom have landed there through the criminal justice system, whereas it used to be more of a blend of people who they call forensic patients. They're found not competent to stand trial or not guilty by reason of insanity, or you have a family member who's in dire need and you petition a civil court and have him or her committed to the hospital. But the criminal justice system is just so overwhelmed now that we're failing people before they get involved, that this hospital is really bearing the burden.
So right now, what are they doing then to accommodate this need for care? And you could say there's such a need and there are just not enough beds. The new facility that they're requesting the money for would have additional beds, correct?
Yes, it would increase the facility to 750 beds. But that goes back to, if you expand it, are you just going to take more people through the criminal justice system, or are we really addressing the core issue? And there are some signs of people, coming at some solutions. There's what's called assisted outpatient treatment pilot program at the courthouse in New Orleans. Judge Kern Reese is overseeing that. That's where you're committed, but you're not locked away in a hospital, and a judge oversees your treatment, and they call it the black robe effect, this idea that you're being checked in by a judge and people will be more compliant with their medication.
How much does the state spend per year for an inmate versus a person who is mentally ill but needs help?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I did just hear an interesting fact that what they call the high users of the system, the people who are most cycling in and out of ERs and jails, the city can identify them. They're like 20 people, and that they cost about $1 million a year if you add it all up.
So one reason that we're in this situation now, we only have 2 state hospitals, mental health hospitals. There have been cutbacks over the years, and of the actual bricks and mortar facilities and in monies.
Yes.
And so does it look like it's going to improve at all?
Well,
and what you've been finding and talking to people in the mental health arena?
I think it ultimately comes down to lawmakers stepping up and paying for it. I think, there are people who are very well intentioned and working hard in the mental health care system, doing what they can with what they have. We shut down hospitals as part of a national move to deinstitutionalize. You say we don't want people locked away for years in these facilities that have, historically had terrible conditions, but we never invested in the outpatient resources that were supposed to make up for that.
Okay, Catherine, good reporting. Thanks a lot. Kevin, over to you, and a little bit lighter issue, certainly. Party buses, and we see a lot of them around town right now, and the city has said, wait a minute, you're not complying, so the Cantrell administration is clamping down on it.
Yeah, I found it to be kind of a really interesting issue that in a way kind of came out of nowhere, although they did pass a set of regulations and promulgated rules for party buses, specifically for party buses, back in 2017. What I'm not clear on is why that would have been left a lot of time for the Landry administration to tell people that they needed to get these buses in compliance, but they've never done that. So it's surprisingly not that hard to get your bus in compliance. There's a few things that you absolutely have to have, like a fire extinguisher has to be on board. They have to inspect for electrical if you've done a lot of electronic type upgrades. Some of these buses will have flat screen televisions and lights, and the big thing is the music. I mean, they roll through town with a lot of blaring music. Now there's a category of party vehicles that are probably never going to be able to be approved as a legal thing, but those would be trailers. And yeah, you see some of these. I see them a lot in the Central Business District. Some of them I assume that they're tourists, that tourists are coming into town to rent them, that maybe they don't know about the party buses, because the party buses seem like they make a little bit more sense if you want to have a party.
So these trailers,
these are open air trailers.
These are flat things that are hauled behind another vehicle and just completely open.
Yeah, they're like the things that you see people hauling junk around on, or maybe put their the landscaping equipment on.
Right.
Those kinds of things, and they'll just put some lighting around it, and then people are just riding around.
Standing on these things, or they put folding chairs or something like that?
No, they stand on them, and they hold on, and they scream to people off of them. I mean,
They must have a cooler of something on there.
yeah,
good chance, yeah.
And then there's also a category which would be the modified party buses, which are modified even further from their original school bus status, which they've actually cut the tops off of them. You may see some of those around. Those are probably never going to be approved. And then the ones less frequently I'll see is sometimes you'll see a vehicle like an old fire engine that has been converted. I see those in the French Quarter every once in a while. It must only be one or two companies that have them, but those are probably never going to be approved either.
Yeah, and those kind of party buses have been around for a while, party fire engines for kids' birthday parties.
Yeah.
We're talking about a little different activity for these other party buses. So what is the city says, we're clamping down. What are they going to do, stop all these things?
Yeah, what they want to do is they want to, if you don't have your, what's called a CPNC, it's a Certificate of Public Necessity and Convenience, and when you get that, you are required, and you'll notice this if you drive around and you see those limo buses or charter buses, it'll say CPNC and a number next to it. That's got to be on the vehicle, so it's obvious that you're not in compliance. So if you don't have that on and you don't have the certificate, then they're going to stop you. The party's going to be over. They're going to take everybody off the bus. They're going to ticket the driver. At their discretion, they could arrest the driver as well, and they could impound the vehicle as well.
How many of these do we have in town?
I mean, it's got to be. It's really popular.
And a lot of different companies that operate these.
A lot of different companies. I've talked to people that, maybe it's just one guy who owns one and runs it. There's some that have a fleet of them. I mean, they've gotten really popular, especially around the bounce music sort of development in the city. Around 2000, that's when bounce started. I talked to one guy who started his party bus in '98. Some of these go out and pick up folks in Baton Rouge and bring them back and kind of just drive all around town. One complaint that you hear pretty frequently is that minors will rent them out as well, and then it's kind of a haven for underage drinking. So I think that's something the city's going to be looking at too, with stopping these buses and checking to make sure, because one of the rules for the regulations is that you do have to have an adult chaperone on if there's minors on.
So what's the checking procedure? Do people go somewhere to get checked, or the inspector's going to go to them, or what?
Yeah, the city has a inspection station which they use for taxi cabs and the other limo buses and that kind of thing. So they're all going to have to go through there. They told me that they think most of the party buses are going to be able to get approved with some minor changes, but it's going to be, there's so many buses that I'm interested in what this timeline is going to look like.
Well, people seem to like their party buses. All right, Kevin, thanks a lot. E, over to you.
Of course, once they're approved, they can have a party to
They
celebrate.
certainly, and
Yeah,
they'll continue to
absolutely.
do that. Pelicans and the End of their season. Couple
Yeah, it
minutes
should have
left.
ended in a better way. This was supposed to be kind of an exciting season. I think the beginning or the end of the season really started last year in that game when Boogie Counts, when he got hurt, and the Pelicans were on the way, and they got into the playoffs and they won their first series, but the team never fully recovered from that. And so, you know, the pointy thing about this was Anthony Davis's last game. He made the decision to announce that he wanted to be traded earlier. He was advised by his agent, you know, if you announce early, and let's say we want to go to the Lakers, then maybe we could do this big trade with the Lakers, and then you could be in the same team with Aaron James, and then y'all can go into the playoffs. Well, it just didn't work out that way. The Pelicans didn't buy into it, neither did the Lakers, and in fact, two teams were hurt by it, the Pelicans and the Lakers. And so it ended with Davis, who was so popular here, and you know he was being booed by the fans. He didn't play his last few games, and going into the arena for his last game, he had a T-shirt that said "That's all, folks." And a few
criticized
days
for that.
earlier, he'd been fined for an obscene gesture made to a fan. And so the whole Anthony Davis thing which was such a happy moment in sports history in New Orleans, it ended badly. And so now the Pelicans are rebuilding. Still up is whether or not Alvin Gentry will return as coach. He supposedly had a meeting with his team that night and said, look, if I'm back, we're going to be better next year, and we're going to get to the playoffs. And they might be, because if they do trade Anthony, which they most certainly will, the team they trade with has got to give up a whole lot. And so they might get some really good ball players in the process. But Alvin Gentry said this about Anthony Davis. He liked him, he was a good basketball player, but he took bad advice. And I think that advice he got from his agent.
Well,
just
hopefully the
did him
season will
in.
be better next year. Right now, we need to look ahead. Back to you.
Well, speaking of sports, you know, football season's not too far away, and we have some spring games. But remember, this year, the football season, the college football season, will end in New Orleans with the national championship football game being held January 13th. So all roads head to New Orleans this year.
Okay, Tyler.
Yeah, so in talking about the governor's race, 4 years ago, John Bel Edwards was the ultimate long shot, and I've got a piece coming out in The Advocate that looks kind of back to where he was as the long shot 4 years ago and where he's at today, and what does that mean going forward in this year's governor's race.
There's a book called that too.
I did write a book called Long Shot.
I'm going to be keeping my eye on something proposed Donna's law in the legislature, which would create a self-exclude registry. If you are concerned you're going to harm yourself, you can prevent yourself from buying a gun.
Okay, Kevin.
So they just put out some press today about how much the mayor and council members are supporting this new Harris deal that's going to be going through the legislature. So quite the contrast from last year. You did some great coverage around this issue, and you know it doesn't look like that's going to be an issue this year. So what I'm just going to be looking for is how does that bill kind of move forward, and what's the messaging?
The mayor was very strong in her praise of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, we shall see then. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.